What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with the updated best deck tier list for the brand new format. Of course, the format is just now going into effect. However, we've had about a week to sort of play in it and really see what is going to be good into the coming format. Of course, as the format progresses, things on this list could change. This is still a very preliminary ranking of the decks. There are some things I think are pretty solid, not too much change from the previous format, right? However, some new decks have come into the format. We've spent a lot of the last week to 2 weeks sort of seeing what decks can compete with Tearlament and, sort of stand their own ground in this format. And I'm just going to be going over what I think are sort of the decks and their tier positions for, the brand new ban list. Before we get into this, I do want to let you guys know that I'm trying to climb the 10K ladder. So if you do enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh content and you like what you see here, feel free to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. And without further ado, let's start tiering some decks. So looking at the tier list, we have tier 0, tier 1, Rogue / Can Contend. The Rogue section, I'm sort of going to be leaving for any deck that finds itself with a strangely good matchup into the best decks this format, or can at the very least try to hold their own with a lot of cards good into the format. So this is going to be a sort of weirder tier where these are decks that aren't always great but might find themselves good right now. Good in a regular format, this is, these are decks that you would find tier 1, tier 2 in a format that wasn't so overpowered with a bunch of, namely Tearlament being a tier 0 threat. So these are decks that are normally amazing, but in this format, they're just not where they need to be. And then needs help are decks that, they need either support or just are really fun tier right now. So a lot of decks are going to find themselves in this tier and maybe this tier and even this tier right now, and I'm not going to do a lot of explaining on them because they're decks that I will give more time to in future tier lists, but right now it's almost not even worth mentioning too much about them because they just can't handle the power level of this format. Now the first deck I do want to start with is Tearlament. Let's get it out of the way. Tearlament Ishizu is just tier 0. I think everyone knows it. It is at the forefront of the format. This is the deck to beat. Everything we're playing right now is either Ishizu tier or decks geared to beat this deck. We're preparing for almost one deck in the format with a couple others in the back of our mind. And now we're going to go through the list sort of in order as it is done in the past. Again, a lot of decks are going to find themselves in this tier. I think the ABC Therion deck is a decent deck in a format that isn't, surrounded by a tier 0 threat. Same thing with Phantom Knights. There's really no reason to play this over this, and it doesn't really have a great matchup into tier. It's not terrible. Another thing I should mention, because people are going to be commenting about their favorite decks, right? A lot of these decks, if they go first against Tearlament, yeah, they can win games, but when you look over the span of a lot of rounds or going second into tier or even dealing with some of the threats Tearlament has, they won't have the consistency to beat them all the time. I'm not saying it's impossible for Phantom Knights to beat Tearlament. What I'm saying is they're just not good at doing it consistently, right? So that's sort of, again, something I want to sort of caveat when I'm talking about decks versus Tearlament. BA, I'm going to say needs help. Burning Abyss need help in the form of multiple. Beatrice, I don't know why Beatrice is still at 1. Pendulum, I think, is really solid. I'm going to put it in Rogue. I do think it's a really strong deck, but I don't think it's obviously as good as tier, and I don't think it's the best answer to tier. So I'm going to put it in Rogue. It's a very strong Rogue deck. I do think the new Draco Slayer cards were fantastic, but overall, I'm going to put it in Rogue just because I think the tier 1 decks are the decks that are best at beating Tearlament. Plunder Patrol, good in a regular format. I think they're really interesting this format because it's very easy to access Moark right now because there's a very clear dark deck in the room. Heroes I'm going to put in Rogue for the man on the picture right here. Dark Law is insane versus Tearlament. Now Heroes, again, this is more of a can contend, right? Decks that have an awkwardly good matchup into Tearlament for whatever reason, this one being Dark Law, will find themselves in this tier, and I think Hero do find a good spot there. DDD, I'm going to put good in a regular format. They're a solid combo deck that is, very hard to play, but you could learn the 46-page spreadsheet, and your end board is still not going to be as good as what tier can do and as consistent as Tearlament can do it. So good in a regular format. Branded, my thing with like pure branded is that it like really struggles into the Bestials. So while I think the engine is still like fine, I'm gonna put it here. Like the Bestials destroyed what previous branded was with like branded in red, right? Like the branded we all know and love. And by love, I use that term very loosely because a lot of us don't. However, I do think there is a good version of this deck, and we'll get to that later. I think like the Bestial version is a little higher than this, but I'll sort of explain that later. Dinomorphia, good in a regular format. I still think this deck is super solid, but right now, definitely a little weird. Dinosaur, good in a regular format. I think this deck has gotten some tools recently, especially with the new Doodle cards that came out in the recent Crystal Beast set. I do think dinosaurs have really interesting matchups. I'm tempted to actually put dinosaurs here, just because I think Tyranno is still a really solid card at just breaking tier boards. Problem is, like, Solyek kind of hurts this guy, and that's why I'm going to put it here. It still has some consistency issues as well. Therion, I don't even know how to rank this. This isn't really a deck anymore, like the Brave Punk Therion. Like, Punk stuff is kind of gone, so I'm just not going to rank that. Dragon Maid, I'm actually going to put in Rogue, and that might seem weird, but right now there's like a big push for dragon decks that have really good synergy with the Bestials. And maybe you could say Dragon Maid is like the weakest of the dragon decks that have a good matchup, but decks that can play like the full Bestial package and get value out of it besides just being, you know, a Bestial engine, I think are really good right now. I'm going to say can contend because the deck has an awkward good matchup into tier limit, right? Like even just the regular play of Hieratic Seals and even Sheo, they line themselves really nice into tier limit. Like, of course, Spheres being able to bounce back. Kalos is really good in a lot of situations. It's a little weak to Bestials in the same regard, so that's something to note. But yeah, I'm going to say this is Rogue or can contend, but maybe the weakest one of them. Dragoon Turbo stuff, not right now. I mean, this needs help maybe. You could argue that it's good in a regular format, but I'm going to put like Dark Magician or Dragoon Turbo sort of in needs help. I think it's not that great even in a regular format. Eldritch, yikes. I'm gonna say needs help maybe. Good in a regular format? No, good in a regular format. I almost put needs help because right now the Bestials are everywhere. They destroy Eldritch. It's not a fun time for him. However, in a format without tier limit being the prominent threat it is, the Bestial should also be less of a threat, and then Eldritch can kind of come back into the forefront. Fluandereeze, here's a big one. Yeah, I'm going to put Fluandereeze in tier 1. I think this deck is arguably the best deck at trying to counter tier. That's really interesting to say because I still think tier has a great matchup into Flunder in its own regard. Being able to so easily make Baguska, even if you get de-shifted or, you know, some blowout happens to you, is a really bad thing for Fluandereeze. Also, the fact that tier limit can mill so many cards and get very easy access to Zombie World also hurts Flu. That being said, Flu also has just absolutely positive matchups across the board as long as the deck doesn't brick. I think this deck is probably the second best deck right now. Not much to say there. I think Fluandereeze is solid and everyone knows it. Exo Sister. This is a deck you would expect to see up here in tier 1. I just really don't think it is. The problem with Exo Sister is it's, of course, solid into this deck. It's like okay enough, right? Like its engine lines up very nicely. However, it has a horrendous matchup versus Fluandereeze. It's just not great at all, especially going second into it. All that being said, it lost like some power in the form of Mystic Mine as a way to go second. Like one of its best cards, Martha, is just destroyed by Rule Kalos, which is something interesting. And Mystic Mine was a really good card for this to try and go second. However, I think Exo Sister are still fine. They're just like less good than Flunder at countering tier limit. And I love Exo Sister. It's a deck I have a regional win with. And it's a deck I like to pilot, but I just don't think maybe it's like the best of the rogue decks, but yeah, I don't think it's in tier 1. Drytron, it's good in a regular format. Any format where the Bestials aren't as rampant as they are, this deck is solid. Again, right now, the biggest threat is the Bestial monsters that destroy Drytron. Altergeist, I'll say they're good in a regular format. They're like okay. Maybe they're in need help. I don't think there's any real reason to play this deck without Mystic Mine now. Mystic Mine getting hit is another big change on the ban list, I guess I should mention. Libromancer needs help. This deck hasn't done anything forever. Harpy, they need some support. They definitely need some help. Although there is a really cool like Harpy Tri-Brigade deck I recently featured on the channel that I think is really fun and can put up an impressive board. That being said, I think Harpies in general still need some support. Earth Machine, I'll say good in a regular format. This is a solid deck, but it definitely needs a slower format around it to try to actually grind its advantage and do anything with it. Adagnister, good in a regular format. I think this is a solid Cyburst deck in a regular format. Alistair needs some help. As long as Tier Limit exists, I feel like Alistair is just like the less than fusion deck. Maybe you could argue this to also be good in a regular format, and I think I could make that argument. I'm gonna put it in needs help right now. Prank Kids, yikes. That's all we have to say about that. Tri-Brigade, and I guess more importantly now, Bird Up. I'm gonna put this in Rogue. Interestingly enough, you know, Bird Up got 2 Recital Starling, 3 Tenki, and a lot of their engine has come back. Of course, you know, Samorg is still banned, thank goodness, so no Link 3 into untargetable barrier statue shenanigans are going about. However, 2 Recital Starling is really nice. You can search DD Crows. Your opponent milling your cards is okay in this deck, right? Because if you mill Kits or Nervals, you get pluses for free. You fuel your graveyard. You can now run things maybe like Oath and Rendezvous again because they're getting milled. It's still weird with the Ishizu cards, but I think Bird Up actually it has some potential, so I'm going to put it here. Labyrinth, I'm going to say is good in a regular format. I think Labyrinth might still have some potential even in this format. Maybe you could put it in Rogue and can contend because trap cards are generally good, but overall I think the combination of Bystials and Rule Kalos being able to hit Welcome Labyrinth is a little strange for this deck. Also, the Shufflers from the Ishizu package is weird for this deck as well. Madolche, I'm still going to put in Rogue / can contend. I had a Madolche list I uploaded on the channel recently where I got 2 first place finishes actually. I actually was able to win a Starlight Rule Kalos with Madolche in the middle of tier format. The problem and why I'm not like ranking this deck even higher on this list is Orange Light going to 1 hurt this deck a lot in my opinion. I still think the last build I had is a completely competent build that can still function well. But losing 2 Orange Light did kind of stink, so I'm going to put Madolche here still. Yeah, I guess Mathmech's interesting because I kind of think of it like Drytron, right? If Bystials aren't in the format, then Mathmech is probably the best Cyburst deck, and Drytron, you know, both of these are playable. Bystials put a lot of decks in this tier because if Bystials aren't in the format, decks like Mathmech become good again, so yep. Rika, I'll put good in a regular format, and I guess, you know, I'll put it down here. Not really ranking these in order, but I just want people to see, like, as I put the decks, sort of where they go. Rika, I think, is a really strong deck that has a decent tier matchup, but tier has honestly gone to a power level so much higher than, like, the Power of the Elements format, where I think this deck was really solid that even this deck having the tribute mechanic that's okay, it's not enough to compete, and I think the Shizu cards hit it pretty bad. Adamancipator needs help. Oop, I missed Sky Striker. This is an interesting one. I'll put good in a regular format. They lost Mystic Mine, which was a really big piece of Sky Striker, but Linkage came out obviously in Mavens, and that was a really solid card for this deck that really puts it in a much better spot than it has been for quite some time. I have sort of some faith in Ray, so I'll put her here. Runic? Runic is not really a deck, right? It's more of an engine. Where would I want to rank the engine? It's so weird to talk about Runic because it's like talking about it and its variants. I'll put Runic in Rogue / can contend. I do think there's some really solid Runic decks right now that can compete, and I think Runic, if you play around the Shufflers, your field spell still has like a lot of value and the cards themselves are okay. I think Runic as an engine and its variants are still solid enough right now that they can compete. Salad honestly needs some help, maybe. Like, I feel like it's just one of the less good Cyburst decks. Like, I don't think it's as good as Mathmech will ever be. I don't think it's as good as Adagnister potentially. I don't think it's as good as Marincess, so maybe Salad actually just needs some help. Sharks? You know, interestingly enough, right now, I think they're actually okay. I'll put it in good in a regular format. I think Sharks are actually not bad, especially this format. Weather Painter, I'm gonna put it in Rogue. No, it's so weird. The way I've done this, maybe for can contend, I'm gonna put Weather Painter there. The thing about Weather Painter is they can play D-Shifter, Skill Drain, I believe they can play Necro Valley. So you're taking a deck that has a slow rolling engine, but can just fit a bunch of cards to counter tier. And in a sense, you can also probably run Zombie World with triple Metaverse in this deck. I'm not sure how that works with its own field spell, but it probably has ways to beat this as well. Again, it can play Skill Drain. So it has some really good cards into this. And I know this is really weird to see Weather Painter up here. Why is Weather Painter above these decks that are much better than it? Honestly, right now, it just has like a decent matchup with the cards it can play. So maybe this is weird. Maybe it's not really in this tier. But I want to put like Weather Painter as a rogue option because it just has such a good matchup into what's good right now. Sprite, I'm going to put it in tier 1. I did a video recently talking about what rogue decks are potentially good, and I was tempted to not put Sprite in tier 1, but recently I do think like Bestial Sprite is really strong, specifically the Bestial variant, because Swap Frog bouncing back Magnemute is such a cool play, and you can dump the turtle from your deck and bring it back with Double Cross. I think Sprite is evolving in a way where it can be a solid tier 1 deck, so I'm willing to put Sprite here. I think it's really solid. That's not a deck. Frogs are no longer a deck because Ronin Totem doesn't exist. Yeah, these 3 just need to be removed from the tier list. Sword Soul, good in a regular format. I just think they're too slow right now. I've seen Sword Soul pop off, right? Like, it can still make amazing boards. The problem is it loses to go second cards harder than most decks right now. Is this what I'm using to represent dragons? I'm not actually... Okay, Rocket Dragon Link, I'll put good in a regular format because it still is. And you might be wondering, but dragons are so good right now. You know, honestly, I'm going to put Rocket Dragon Link here with Dragon Maid because, yes, Rocket Dragon Link should be just as good. Rocket Bestial Dragon Link should be just as good as Dragon Maid now that I'm thinking about it. If I'm going to put this up here, this should be too. Again, decks that can run Bestial as more than just like a go second sort of engine, I think get a lot of value from them and makes them a little better right now. So I'll put that there. Trap Tricks needs help. Luckily, it is getting that help in the Trap Trick structure deck. This deck is going to be so crazy. In fact, I think tomorrow I'm going to upload a video about Trap Tricks because this is, would I call it my favorite deck since I've been back? It's one of my favorite decks. I absolutely love Trap Tricks. I love their designs and always have since 2014, since Hat format. So I'm super glad they're getting their structure deck help. Evil Twin in Sprite, good in a regular format. I think Evil Twin Runic Sprite is the better version of Sprite. It's the best version of Sprite in my opinion, if we're not in a tier limit format. So I'll put Evil Twin down here. Marincess, I'll say, interesting is Marincess has such a large engine that can play a lot of flex spots to beat tier limit. And also I have seen Zelantis absolutely destroy tier limit boards. That being said, I think mostly this is just good in a regular format. I think this is the best Cyburst deck in a regular format with Bestials. And if Bestials aren't in the format, then Math Mech is a little bit better, unfortunately. But yep. Umi needs some help. It's barely a deck right now. It does some cool stuff, but you know, you don't see it do much. Virtual World needs some help. I'll say good in a regular format. It's usually a pretty solid deck if we have a fair format. Agents need some help. I don't know if they're getting them anytime soon since they just got a massive amount of support, but any fairy support in the future could be good support for them. Punk needs some help. Zombies. I'm gonna put zombies in Rogue because there's like a zombie tier limit deck. I've seen a couple of those going around that is like decent. Maybe it's like good in a regular format still. But right now, I do think Zombie World absolutely dominates the second best deck in the room. And I'll put zombies here for that reason. You can also play the Ishizu cards in here and be disgusting. So, yep, I think this deck is solid. Gren Maju, I guess it depends which version. I'm gonna say good in a regular format right now. You can play a more stun variant, but I have a different picture to represent stun, so I'll leave that at that. Infernity needs some help. Spellbooks, Runic Spellbook I think could be good in a regular format, so I'll put that there. Paleo, good in a regular format right now. I think it's just way too overshadowed by this. I wouldn't even really put it in Rogue right now. The Ishizu cards made this deck so hard to play, which is unfortunate. I got second place with it at a regional. I was really proud of the deck. I really love the deck, but the Ishizu cards really made this deck take a back seat. Cyber Dragon needs some help. I think this deck has been really weak ever since Verte got banned, but it still does some cool stuff. I think it's just format dependent. B-Trooper needs some help. This deck, honestly, what this deck needs is Max C. I hope it never gets Max C. But I do like B-Trooper, but again, when Verte got hit, this deck also lost any steam it had. Ninja needs some help. Like, I think the last tier list, I had this in a higher tier because I had hoped to see what players would do with it. Players have done nothing with it. We're in a tier 0 format. There's almost no reason to even attempt ninjas, it feels like, so I'll leave that there. Naturia. I want to put this in can contend, but it could be tier 1. I know that's really weird to say, like, is Naturia that big of a threat? I think Naturia right now, especially like the Bestial, Ishizu, Runic, Naturia, like, I don't even want to call it a pile since it's usually still around 40 cards. But there's ways to maneuver in Naturia that has some crazy plays. It does some really cool things. And I think it, it benefits quite a bit from your opponent milling cards. The Ishizu shuffling back your traps is really cool. The Bestials actually do some really fun plays in this deck where you can like synchro into 6s and exceeds with the Bestials. I don't know. I'm tempted to put this here, but honestly, I don't think it's right there yet. Maybe if we see more of this deck, I'll be more, willing to put it in tier 1, but I'm going to put it here. It's really hard in a tier 0 format to decide what goes in these tiers. These spots that used to be filled with like 15 decks in our Nationals format definitely have been slimmed down. Bestials, I'll put in tier 1. Now, this is Bestial Dragons. It's a deck that if you watch like a lot of Dueling Book replays, you will definitely see this deck picking up steam because it has an insane matchup into this. I think it's solid into this. It's a little weird versus Flu. I would say Bestial Dragons is more of like a pure dragon deck that's running like black metals right now and definitely has room for evolution. Like it's running Seyferts with Levy, of course, because your opponent can mill those, and the Bestials work so nice with it. Branded Regain's an insane card. I think this is the best version of essentially what Rockets and Dragon Maid are both trying to do. That being said, I think all three of these are really good. I also think Bestial Branded is a deck that people have been talking about a little bit. I don't know if it's that good. I haven't seen it too much, but I think it's worth mentioning. But I'm going to put like Bestial decks, like the best version of a Bestial deck in tier 1. Stun, I'm putting this deck straight up in Rogue, and that sounds silly. When was the last time we saw Stun do anything or exist in Yu-Gi-Oh? But we're just at a point where one deck, and really two decks, are so powerful that just summoning an Inspector Border might be your best bet. Like if you're not willing to learn maybe the Teal Limit Mirror Match or play Fluandereeze, Inspector Border just shuts both of these decks down pretty hard. And like we're just running D-Fissure, Border, Thunder King, Ryo, ways to get to them, either the Gizmek Field Spell or Small World. There's a lot of stuff you can do with Stun. I think this deck is actually pretty solid, which is funny. The last deck, and I'm going to put it in Rogue, is Crystal Beasts. Now, this deck is very similar to Weather Painter, if I bring Weather Painter down here. These decks right now, I think can contend. I wouldn't actually call them Rogue decks, but of course I have Rogue can contend decks that can function in this format for randomly having a good matchup. All this deck does, and is in the form of Conclave control, is put up Necro Valley, activate D-Shifter, flip TC Boo, make Baguska. It does everything ever to just destroy these two decks. So I think Crystal Beast, like a nasty stun version of Crystal Beast, in the same vein as Stun or Weather Painter, it plays a small engine that isn't really great, but it can play so many stun cards that I think it's fine. And yeah, that's going to be it for this tier list. Leave down in the comments below how you would tier it, what would you do different, how would you rank the decks. What decks am I missing? I know I am probably missing 50 decks you guys want to see. Kashtira is one I'm going to be saving for Photon Hypernova. I know only like 10% of the people watching this video will actually hear that sentence, and I'm still going to get a billion comments, but I figured I'd mention it. Kashtira is going to be for the next tier list. I don't think it's worth even ranking right now almost. But yeah, what other decks did I miss? Leave your thoughts down below. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.